Which country launched the Deep Ocean Mission robotic probe to explore the Mariana Trench in January 2026? India. India's Samudrayan mission reached a new depth record for an indigenous manned submersible in the Indian Ocean. Which European nation held a snap general election in January 2026 resulting in a coalition government? Spain. Spain's political landscape saw a shift in January 2026 leading to a new multi-party coalition focused on regional autonomy. Which international organization declared 2026 as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists? United Nations. The UN General Assembly designated 2026 to highlight the importance of sustainable land management and pastoralist livelihoods. Which island nation was declared 100% plastic-free in January 2026? Palau. Palau successfully completed its 5-year roadmap to ban all single-use plastics and non-biodegradable packaging. The first-ever eSports Olympic Games, host for late 2026, was confirmed in January as Riyadh. The IOC confirmed Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, as the inaugural host for the eSports Olympic Games. In January 2026, the world's oldest living person celebrated their 119th birthday in which country? Japan. The milestone was celebrated in Fukuoka, Japan, highlighting the nation's advanced geriatric care. Which film won Best Motion Picture, Drama, at the 83rd Golden Globe Awards in January 2026? Shadows of History. The historical epic Shadows of History swept the major categories at the Golden Globes. Which European city was named the Green Capital of Europe for 2026 in January? Guimarães. The Portuguese city of Guimarães was honored for its sustainable urban transformation and green transport. The Antarctic Ice Treaty was updated in January 2026 to ban what permanently? Mineral mining. Global powers agreed to extend the ban on mineral and oil extraction in Antarctica indefinitely to protect the ecosystem. The 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, WEF, was held in January 2026 in which city? Davos. The WEF annual meeting traditionally takes place in Davos, Switzerland, focusing on the 2026 theme, Navigating a Multipolar Economy. Which tech giant launched the Neuralink 4.0 consumer-grade interface in January 2026? Neuralink. Elon Musk's Neuralink received expanded regulatory approval for its latest brain-computer interface focused on accessibility. Which female athlete broke the world record for the 100m indoor sprint in January 2026? Julian Alfred. St. Lucian sprinter Julian Alfred set a new indoor world record at the World Athletics Indoor Tour. The New Delhi Declaration on AI Safety was updated in January 2026 by which group? Quad. The Quad nations, India, US, Japan, Australia, met in Tokyo to standardize AI safety protocols based on the previous Delhi framework. Who was appointed as the new managing director of the IMF in January 2026? Geeta Gopinath. Geeta Gopinath took over the leadership of the International Monetary Fund, focusing on digital finance reform. Who was named Time Person of the Year for the year 2025 in the January 2026 issue? The climate scientists. Time honored the collective efforts of climate scientists for achieving the first measurable slowdown in global warming rates. The World Bank reported that which region had the fastest growing economy in January 2026? East Africa. Led by Ethiopia and Kenya, East Africa emerged as the global leader in GDP growth for the quarter. Who won the men's singles title at the Australian Open in January 2026? Carlos Alcaraz. Carlos Alcaraz secured his first Australian Open title in a thrilling 5-set final in Melbourne. Which currency became the world's most used for cross-border digital payments in January 2026? ECNY, Digital Yuan. China's digital yuan saw record adoption in international trade settlements across Asia and Africa. Which nation officially joined the BRICS alliance as a full member on 1st January 2026? Indonesia. Following the 2025 summit invitation, Indonesia officially became a full member of the BRICS bloc to strengthen Global South cooperation. In January 2026, which country became the 33rd member of NATO? Ukraine. Following a prolonged ratification process, Ukraine's flag was officially raised at NATO headquarters in Brussels. The World Literature Prize was awarded in January 2026 to an author from which country for the novel The Silent River? South Korea. The prestigious award was given to a South Korean novelist for a poignant story on the division of the peninsula. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture 2026 cycle began with a focus on what theme in January? Refugee housing. The 2026 cycle focuses on dignity and sustainability in displaced person settlements. Which telescope discovered a megaearth in a habitable zone in January 2026? James Webb, JWST. The JWST identified a rocky planet 3 times the size of Earth with atmospheric signatures of water vapor. NASA's Artemis 4 mission reached a major milestone in January 2026 involving which lunar component? Lunar Gateway Module docking. January 2026 marked the successful docking of the primary habitation module for the Lunar Gateway space station. Which global brand announced the first fully recyclable smartphone in January 2026? Fairphone. Fairphone 6 was launched as the first device where 100% of components are sourced from recycled materials and are fully modular. In January 2026, which country became the first in the world to implement a digital nomad universal visa? Japan. Japan launched its highly anticipated universal visa for remote workers to boost its local economy and address population decline. Which company deployed the first 6G experimental satellite constellation in January 2026? Samsung. Samsung, in collaboration with South Korean space agencies, launched the first satellites dedicated to testing 6G terrestrial-to-satellite handovers. The price of gold reached a historic high of how much per ounce in January 2026? $3,200. Global economic uncertainty and a shift in central bank reserves drove gold prices to a record $3,200 per ounce. A historic peace treaty was signed in January 2026 between which two North African nations over border disputes? Morocco and Algeria. Brokered by the African Union, Morocco and Algeria signed a friendship and border security accord to ease decades-old tensions. Which country launched the Great Green Wall 2.0 initiative in January 2026? Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Green Initiative entered a new phase to plant 10 billion trees across the Middle East. The Biodigital Treaty was signed in Geneva in January 2026 to regulate what? Synthetic biology. International leaders agreed on ethical boundaries for the creation of synthetic organisms and DNA data storage. The global minimum corporate tax of 15% was officially implemented by how many countries as of January 2026? 140. Following years of negotiation, over 140 nations officially began enforcing the OECD-led tax framework. A record-breaking nuclear fusion experiment in January 2026 was achieved by which facility? East China. China's artificial sun, EAST, maintained a high-temperature plasma for a record 2000 seconds, a breakthrough for clean energy. The 2026 Winter Asian Games began in January in which city? Harbin, China. The 9th Asian Winter Games opened in Harbin, showcasing China's winter sports infrastructure. Which nation launched the National Happiness Index as a mandatory budget metric in January 2026? Finland. Finland integrated mental well-being and social trust metrics directly into its annual federal budget process. Which country was officially announced as the host for the 2030 FIFA World Cup final in January 2026? Spain. The FIFA committee confirmed Madrid, Spain, as the venue for the 2030 centennial final. Which major music festival announced a permanent, hologram-only stage starting January 2026? Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland introduced a high-tech stage featuring lifelike performances from deceased and remote music legends. Which car manufacturer announced it had successfully transitioned to 100% solid-state batteries for all new models in January 2026? Toyota. Toyota began the mass rollout of solid-state battery EVs, promising 1,000 kilometers range and 10-minute charging. The Global Vaccine Alliance announced a new universal vaccine for which virus in January 2026? Dengue. A highly effective, low-cost universal dengue vaccine was approved for global distribution starting in Southeast Asia and South America. Who was sworn in as the President of Chile in January 2026 following the late 2025 elections? Jose Antonio Cast. Following a significant political shift, the newly elected conservative leadership took office in Santiago. A new global heritage site was designated by UNESCO in January 2026 in which conflict-affected region? Kyiv, Ukraine. The historic city center of Kyiv was granted enhanced protection status to preserve its architectural history. In January 2026, which artist's lost painting was rediscovered in a private collection in Italy? Caravaggio. A lost work attributed to the Baroque master Caravaggio was authenticated by experts in Rome. A major global silicon shortage was declared over in January 2026 by which organization? WTO. The WTO confirmed that semiconductor supply chains had fully stabilized, ending the crisis that began in 2020. Which country hosted the 2026 G7 summit's preliminary ministerial meetings in January? Canada. Canada, holding the G7 presidency for 2026, began hosting preliminary summits in Ottawa and Toronto. Which city hosted the World Expo 2025 closing ceremony in early January 2026? Osaka. The Osaka Expo concluded with a handover to the organizers of the 2030 Expo in Riyadh. Who assumed the presidency of the European Union Council on 1 January 2026? Denmark. Denmark took over the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU from Luxembourg for the first half of 2026. Which tech company became the first to reach a $5 trillion market capitalization in January 2026? NVIDIA. Driven by the AI hardware explosion, NVIDIA became the world's most valuable company at $5 trillion. In January 2026, the world's first carbon capture passenger ship set sail from which port? Oslo. Norway's latest maritime innovation uses onboard carbon capture technology to achieve net zero emissions on long-haul routes. The Henley Passport Index, released in January 2026, ranked which country's passport as the most powerful? Singapore. Singapore retained the top spot, offering visa-free access to 195 destinations. Which Indian-origin scientist received the Global Breakthrough Prize in January 2026 for physics? Dr. Swati Mohan. The NASA engineer was recognized for her leadership in the Mars Sample Return Mission architecture.